the chaos. This is not the first temple uh, that was dedicated to Athena. There is actually another temple uh, that was much older than this one, and it was actually destroyed when the Persians invaded. So here we can kind of see where the old temple is located in reference to the Parthenon. Uh, so this was obviously a very devastating blow to the Athenians. And fast forwarding to present time, I'd like to share the story of how a item from back then was discovered in March of 2012 as the Parthenon's southwest corner became a focus of attention for the Acropolis Monuments Restoration Service, as a feature was unexpectedly encountered when workers began disassembling the temple's entablature. Inside a narrow cavity between the 14th triglyph from the north and the block behind it, an undisturbed deposit of loose soil and marble chips was revealed. This contained a shallow bronze bowl called a phyllid. In it was part of an animal leg bone and a bronze tube fitted inside, which was probably a musical pipe, also called an aulos. These objects lay near the bottom of the cavity, just below the surface of chips and dirt that appeared to have accumulated inside the void, about 10 to 20 centimeters thick. This was from the mason's activity and probably as a result of the exposure to the elements. Visible in the earth around, the artifacts were dark, distinctive traces of burning, apparently from a localized, perhaps ceremonial fire. The bronze bowl has been identified as a mesophallic phial about 22 centimeters in diameter, possibly of Greek or Eastern type. Its interior and exterior decoration consists of wreaths of lanceolate leaves around the central omphalos, while its sides are similarly adorned with lanceolate leaves and a crosshatch band. The ring carries a barely legible votive inscription of archaic date directed most probably to the goddess Athena. Such bronze offerings in the Acropolis were retained in the sanctuary's permanent treasure of votive dedications and were hence considered to have divine energy. They were occasionally brought out for religious rituals, which each new reuse, making them even more precious and sacred. The 2012 discovery was not the first bronze vessel to be found inside the Parthenon's walls. In 1986, a shallow bronze bowl was recovered from a gap between the architraves and the temple's east end. Its dented condition and interior traces of red earth paint, also called miltus, indicated that it was a worker's paint pot that had accidentally fallen down between the two members. The unusual circumstances of the 2012 filing with the burning and aulos indicates this latest bronze vessel was involved in some sort of religious ceremony, probably a libation offering accompanied by a small ritual fire. These bowls were often used for libations when wine, oil, honey, milk, or even sacred water were poured out as a thank offering or voting to the gods. The unusual circumstances of the 2012 fire with the burning in aulos indicated that this latest bronze vessel was involved in some sort of religious ceremony, probably a libation offering accompanied by a sparge of fire. The caryatids of the erection were originally holding phials in the right hands, perhaps as they prepared to offer libations to Kepros, the mythical king of Athens, believed to be entombed just beneath their porch. Libations were common at symposia, weddings, sometimes offered as gifts, also at athletes' victory celebrations, momentous departures, and even funeral banquets. During the ritual, a priest or priestess would offer gratitude or votive appeal for divine favor while pouring out the libation to the musical accompaniment of a spondylus or flute player. The phial had been intentionally positioned in its final resting place behind the tripod. But for what reason? And why was it left at that particular spot in the Parthenon's still incomplete structure? Well, it is suggested that it was a lasting gift presented to Athena, as well as an official expression of piety and request for protection on behalf of the entire city. Nevertheless, the bowl's singular position inside the wall of the half-constructed Parthenon, high up in a spout, accessible only by scaling the wooden scaffolding that still held the temple, makes one wonder if the libation was less of a formal municipal ceremony by city officials than an ad hoc offering made by the temple's workers and perhaps its architects. Conclusions on this enigmatic ceremony are inspiring and thought-provoking. The libation was made at a critical juncture in the Parthenon's construction when the building had nearly been finished, but still awaited its roof. The builders desired to thank the goddess for her help in completing the temple up to the point and to ask her for further aid in now successfully completing the project. Even more intriguingly, Athena became a partner and protector during the act of construction. The builders sought to strengthen the temple's corner under her watchful eye because solid and secure corners contributed to the structural strength and durability of the temple. One really can't overstate the importance of the Persian War for the Athenian mindset that created the Parthenon. Athens was invaded and the Persians sacked the Acropolis. They destroyed the sacred site. They destroyed the temples and buildings. They burned them down. And in fact, the Athenians took a vow that they would never remove the ruins of the old temple to Athena. So they would always remember it. However, a generation later, they ended up removing the ruins. A peace that was established with the Persian is believed to be the reason that led them to renege on the vow. Pericles was the leader of Athens, and he embarked on this enormous, very expensive building campaign. Historians believe that he was able to fund that because the Athenians had become the leaders of what was called the Delian League, an association of Greek city-states that paid a kind of tax to help protect Greece against Persia. But Pericles took money from that treasury and used it to build this building. This alliance of Greek city-states kept their treasure, their tax money, and their tribute in Delos, hence the name Delian League. But Pericles managed to have that treasure moved to Athens and actually housed it in the Acropolis. And the sculpture of Athena herself, which was made of gold and ivory, uh, was said to be kept uh, in case they ever needed money. They could melt it down. And since we no longer have the sculpture, we can only assume that it was melted down at some point. So we need to imagine that this building was not always the way it looks now. It wasn't always white and pristine, but rather brightly colored, and also a building that was used as a storehouse. It is believed that it was used as a treasury. And so we have to imagine that it was absolutely full of valuables. In fact, there are records that give us some idea of what was stored here. We think about temples or churches or mosques as these places where we go worship, but that's not how the Greek religion worked. There usually was an altar on the outside where sacrifices were made on. In the temple was the house of the god or goddess. But with the Parthenon, our historians and archaeologists have not been able to locate an altar outside. So we wonder, what was the building used for? So one answer is that it was used as a treasury, but it also functions symbolically. It is up on this hill, it commands this extraordinary view from all parts of the city, and so it was a major symbol of the city's wealth and power, and it's a gift to the goddess Athena. When you make a gift to your patron goddess, you want visitors to be awed by the image of the goddess that was inside of her home. And this isn't just any goddess, this is the goddess of wisdom. So the ability of man to understand our world and its roots mathematically and then express them in a structure like this one is absolutely appropriate. So we know that the Greeks, even in the archaic period before this, were concerned with the ideal proportions, and they were searching for perfect proportions and harmony and using mathematics as a basis for thinking that through. And these are all elements that we're able to see in this building to an unbelievable degree. What's extraordinary is that perfection is an illusion based on a series of subtle distortions that actually correct the imperfections of the side. That is, the Greeks recognized that human perception was itself flawed and that they needed to adjust for it in order to give the visual impression of perfection, and their mathematics and their building skills were precise enough to be able to pull this off. Every stone was cut to fit precisely. Although most of the interior of the Parthenon has decayed due to the ravages of time, the rectangular symmetry of its exterior looks flawless to this day. But strangely enough, for the temple that was clearly built with perfection in mind, what makes the Parthenon so fascinating, it's actually its imperfection. Not only were the Greeks masters of geometry, they were also masters of optical illusions. They knew the fact that our eye plays tricks on us. Therefore, they built the Parthenon slightly incorrectly, quote unquote, to compensate for this so that the net result could be perfection. When we look at this building, we assume it's rectilinear. We assume that it is rectilinear and it's full of right angles, but in fact, there's hardly any right angles in this building. The Parthenon seems like a rectangle, but there are practically no right angles in the entire building. Everything is slightly off. The columns look straight from below, but they're slightly tilted towards each other.